So if you watch a lot of YouTubers here on the platform talk about their builds, there are a couple of terms that you'll hear come up a ton. Things like depth, detail, and variation, but nobody really explains what these things are whenever they're doing build tutorials, which makes some people not really know what they need to add to their own build to make things look better. So in today's episode, I'm going to be going over what is depth, what is detailing, and what is variation. So without further ado, let's go ahead and let's get right into it. So let's start off with something that's relatively easy to explain: depth. What is depth? In front of us, we have a completely flat wall. In fact, this wall, we would say, has no depth whatsoever because it's completely flat. It has a depth of 1 block, meaning that there are no blocks behind it or blocks in front of it that makes it more interesting to look at. It's very boring, not very interesting in any way, and something that you really don't want to have in your builds. You don't want massive sections of flat walls usually. Now let's move over to an example that has some depth and is a little bit more interesting to look at. This is by no means a good wall design, but it is more interesting than something that is completely flat. And the reason for that is because it has 4 blocks of depth. You can see that things go out and in a little bit deeper. This just makes things look a little bit better and a bit more appealing to the eye. This is the basics of what depth is. It's making things go deeper in space, making things more 3-dimensional rather than something that is a flat plane and kind of 2-dimensional. Now, adding depth to your build is usually a good thing, but a lot of the times you don't want to do this with full blocks because it's a little bit too harsh. There are too harsh of edges and things just start looking funny, kind of like this wall that we have in front of us. But a great way to add more depth to a wall without it being so harsh is to use some stairs instead. Using things like stairs add a little bit of depth gradually into a full block. So you can just sprinkle these around in your build instead, and this adds depth still, but it's a little bit more gradual. So you get something that looks a bit like that, and that is much better. So that is the basics of what depth is. It is making things go inward or outward toward the player in order to make things look more appealing to the eye. Now let's talk about what detailing is. This is another term that you hear builders use quite a lot, but they don't exactly explain it. Detailing is basically anything that can break up a section of wall and give it a more interesting look. So in front of us, we have a completely flat oak wall that has absolutely no detailing on it. It's very plain, there's nothing breaking up this mass amount of textures, and overall, it just kind of looks pretty bad. But if we move over a bit, you can see that I have things that are similar texturally, but that add a little bit of depth that we've already talked about before, and also some detail. Anything that is a change in the texture, even if it's the same type of block, such as the fence and the button here, they're all wood materials, but they add detail. They make things stand out a bit because the texture changes. Trapdoors, fences, buttons, slabs, even stairs are all detailing blocks. They make things have more depth, and they also have a texture change to them usually in order to add more detail to a build. Also, empty space is a detail for a build. Anything like a window or cracked, crumbled roofs that have empty holes in them, anything like that is a detail. Details are things that make your build interesting. In fact, if this was something like a roof, like I've mentioned in my previous videos, anything that just sticks off of a build like this is a detail. Even though this one kind of looks garbage, anything that makes a build interesting is technically going to be a detail. And whenever people say that they're going to detail out their build, basically what they mean is they're going to make their walls not look so flat by adding additional blocks, adding depth, adding anything like that. That is basically what detailing means. Detailing can also mean adding things like bushes, flowers, things like that. Anything to break up a wall. Anything to break up something that is very, very plain and ugly. That is what detailing is. It's just adding in small amounts of material and texture changes in order to make something look better. Detailing's kind of a harder one to explain in words, but basically it's making sure this doesn't happen and making things look more interesting like this. So now let's talk about variation. Variation is one of those words that when builders use it, they're usually talking about one of two things. First, they could be talking about block variation, which is what I'm going to cover here. The other term is they could mean variation as in organic building and randomness. Let's talk about block variation first. In front of us, we have a completely blank wall again. No block variation whatsoever. We have nothing but oak planks. But if we move over to this wall here, we have a lot of different block variation of the same type of wood. We still have oak wood, stripped oak wood, oak leaves. This is a much more interesting wall because it has block variation. It has texture variation. It is a difference or a change. This has no change in texture, therefore it has no variation. Whereas something like this does have change in texture. In fact, it has 3 changes in texture. Therefore, it is more varied. It has more variation and it looks better. Now, the other definition of variation is something that more advanced builders would use, and that term for variation is basically organic building. Something that is kind of random, and maybe they're making a weird statue or something where they're doing block variation very organically. That's not what I'm covering here, and that is another way to use the word variation, but what we're going to cover here is going to be block variation. Block variation means change your textures up. Don't just have the same texture over and over again because it just looks boring. Adding any type of texture change is more interesting than just having the same texture over and over and over and over again. Have something that changes. Have something that pulls the eye toward this area and says, oh, hey, that looks pretty cool. So when people are not talking about block variation or texture variation, they're usually talking about placement variation. That just means placing things kind of randomly. Things like my path would be a random variation placement because I just kind of place things randomly. Same thing with the rocks that I do on the side of my paths. Things like that are all organic building or variation building. They are semi-random placements in order to make key points of interest. Ways to do this is to make something that stands out from the earth. It adds depth to this side of the path. Other ways to do that would be vary up your path. Basically, variation just means change, and anything that is different from the norm is a way to add variation. So that could be varying your build by adding a key point of interest in your build, or it could just be randomizing something in your build, or adding variation whenever you're doing with a gradient. So as we covered in our last video of adding gradients into your build to make them look nicer, this is variation of placement. I just kind of varied where I place my cobblestone. Variation, I mean, basically it just means change. Any type of change is a variation. It is a variation from the norm. Organic building is pretty much all variation, and then block variation is something that is very important. So if you get block variation, eventually you'll kind of pick up variation in placement. Block variation is the one that I really want beginners to focus on, so you get things that are more natural. You can work with gradients, you can work with randomness. Once you get those key aspects down, then you can start working with some more advanced techniques in building. But let's go back and let's put all of this knowledge together in order to make a wall design that actually looks pretty good. So we've talked about depth, we've talked about detailing, and we've also talked about variation. Now let's put all of these together in order to make a wall design that does not look like complete garbage. So if we go ahead and move over here, this is my brand new wall design. This is a wall design that uses depth, detail, and variation in it. Let's go over all three and I'll show you all three in action. So first and foremost, let's get a side shot of this and you can see that this has 3 blocks of depth. I could even go deeper by adding in more blocks back here, but I just wanted to show you that you can go just as far out as you can in if you want to. So let's go ahead and remove these 3 blocks. And now let's talk about detailing. We have a lot of detailing blocks in here. We have the bushes that are out front here. We have fences. We have lanterns on top giving out some light. We have flowers that are adding little pops of color. We have trap doors for our windows, trap doors in order to make our little planting pot area there. All of those are details. Now let's talk about variation. Variation, we are using the oak wood logs back there, the stripped oak wood logs back there, and then we have the regular plank texture on the slabs and the stairs that are in these windows. Also notice that these are also adding depth. This adds a whole block of depth and change from this block space to that block space, and then the stairs add a bit of depth to where you can see the windowsill a bit more. This is a much better wall design than what this was. This adds depth, detail, and variation, and this adds nothing. It's really boring and it doesn't look good. One last thing that I want to talk about is this also all applies to landscaping. You can add a lot of detail to your builds by landscaping around the build. Adding things like flowers, bushes, grass, tall grass, ferns, tall ferns, even little rock structures like this can all add detail to your build around it. Your landscaping is just as important as the build you make, so make sure that everything looks pretty around your build as well as the build itself looks good. Nothing is worse than having a beautiful build with a terrible front lawn. Now, in the last episode, I showed you guys the 5x5 building method, and I started to show you guys a building that I was working on. Well, I have since completed that building and I want to show it to you guys here in order to show you the detail and the depth that I added through the whole building. So without further ado, here we go, ladies and gentlemen. As you can tell, this is a huge change from the last time that you saw this. I've added more detail in here by adding in lanterns. I've added in a little pergola here. I've added in details with the trap doors. Added in fences, added in bushes, added in grass with flowers all around, added in this little rock structure that just kind of looks a little cool. I've added in so much detail. In fact, I've even added in detail into the windows by adding in some fences. Lots of things have changed around here, but this is just an example of what you can do by adding those 3 words into your building. Adding depth, adding detailing, and adding variation into your builds makes things go from boring and flat and kind of ugly looking into something that is gorgeous. Anyway, guys, I hope this video helped to explain what the difference is between depth, detail, and variation, and I hope this helps with your own builds. If you're new around here, be sure to consider subscribing as well as leaving a like on this video. So many people watch the videos without actually leaving a like, and it actually really helps me out. If you just take 2 seconds out of your day, click the like button, it really helps out my channel. But anyway, guys, that's going to be it for me today. I hope you enjoyed, and I will see you in the next one. You guys have a great day. I'll actually come over here and just get a little pretty ending shot. How about that? Ooh, gorgeous.